every day. We have been meditating 20 minutes just to get an answer.
I don't know what it is, but I know there's something more, there's something deeper.
And we would hang out and, do what Rastafarians do.
I have no idea what you're talking about. And just because you have me under these lights, I'm not going to budge. I'm not going to tell you anything. When I was very young, I think I was about 5 or 6 years old, I had an experience of, I was staying at my grandparents' place in north of Copenhagen. And they were living on top of a little hill where there were fields all the way around. And there were fields with grain that was higher than me. And I ran out and it was a summer day. And then I just felt a very strong surge, you could say, of happiness, of bliss in a way. I don't know if you call it bliss, but it was happiness. And I just let myself fall back into the grain and the clouds. I remember the clouds there and the sun was just baking on me. It was just so fantastic. That, I would say, in a way, was a kind of spiritual experience, even though I didn't know that at that time, of course. I had no clue what it was. I was just happy, so it was just happiness to me.
When I was 16 years old. And so I was still in Calgary, and we used to go to these old-time country dances out in the country, a group of us friends. And one night we went to one in the foothills of the Rockies, and we had a wonderful time. And then on the way back, we were going through some highway construction, and friends of mine in the car in front of us were hit by a truck, and head on, and it was of course, obviously a big shock. But at the time, so we were outside the car, we were waiting for the ambulance and so on, and finally I ended up back home, but I didn't really know what happened to my 2 friends in the car. And I was sitting with my parents that morning, and we were listening to the news on the radio, and they announced that my friend who was driving the car had died in the car. And it was as if my mind somehow just opened, because, I didn't have any religious instruction or anything like that, never even thought about it. But this thought just came into my head, and I thought to myself, well, Barry's body is dead, but Barry himself is not dead. Like, there is something of Barry that is still alive. And I didn't know about soul or anything like that. But this opened my heart and my mind.
Because we had the apartheid government in place, the white people like myself grew up in a very privileged bubble. I was always a bit of a dreamer. I think it started, I was about 14 or 15 years old, and I had rheumatic fever. And in one of those, I became quite delirious for a long time. The doctor thought I could have had encephalitis, but it wasn't encephalitis. My parents refused that. He did a lumbar puncture, so he just treated me symptomatically. But one night in a deep fever, I had an experience where I still remember to this day, in which I think I saw my guide, sort of a Chinese guy, an ancient Chinese guy with a little lantern bent over. So that is the first really profound experience that I can remember, and that was quite early in my childhood. I always felt a little bit detached and and an outsider after that, you know, like an observer.
So we were living in the countryside. With my parents, I've learned many things about spiritualities, all kinds of spirituality. And my father was very fond of Vivekananda, and Krishnamurti, but also Christians, mystics, all kinds, Buddhism. And since I was a child with my mother, we are always speaking of God. And so I was looking for him, and I knew that it has to be inside, because I started to practice Hatha Yoga and yoga when I was 10 years old. And so we used to go inside. But I would like to have a direct contact with God, like the saints are doing.
Well, you know, growing up, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. My teenage years were in the 60s, and I was 14 probably when the hippie, 15 maybe, when the hippie time started, and at that time Beatles had been there with the big thing, and then suddenly acid music, as they call, like Vanilla Fudge from New York and Pink Floyd and Procol Harum and these different, that were more like psychedelic rock came out. And also one of Jimi Hendrix's records, Electric Ladyland, was very psychedelic. So all this kind of thing, the music and the whole time, and the hippie movement was all in for trying to, shall we say, get out of the post-war kind of depression that everybody was in, the whole world was in a way, the Cold War and all that. And they thought everything was very stiff and they needed something new.
You know, there was the Summer of Love, where your heart was really open to people, and especially of your generation. And so there was like a kindling of something, an opening and a unity that was felt at that time in those early days, where people just accepted each other, and it was just very, very beautiful.
Of course, all the drugs also. So I had taken a lot of drugs because in one way we thought the way into the spiritual thing was through drugs also, because we read a lot about shamanism and all these indigenous people who often use different kind of drugs to get to the core of what spirituality might be.
A Rastafarian friend in the Black Township. I would go to the township and we would hang out and, you know, do what Rastafarians do. Get into my car and drive to the beach and jam, and I would take photographs and we would just hang out, and we just, I mean, quite frankly, we got pissed every Friday night.
Two or three times I tried LSD. That was, you know, the Richard Alpert and all that time, exactly at that time when they were really pushing the sensations and the experiences that they could get through LSD. And it certainly was a mind expanding. I did feel as if I was in a different, the same universe but different, more sharper and more like you can almost feel the life in trees and around you, and just operating on a whole different level of existence. But then it wears off. And like so many people at that time, and this was the late 60s and early 70s, I read Autobiography of a Yogi, and that book just, I thought, oh my gosh, I need a teacher. I need to find somebody who's going to help me to really get in touch with whatever I'm feeling inside. I don't know what it is, but I know there's something more, and there's something deeper. It's not just about, listening to music or going to concerts.
I told my parents, okay, now we have a certain knowledge, but I would like to have a direct contact with God, like the saints are doing, not through books, through knowledge, So with this, the only way I could find was meditation, but how to meditate. I was a little bit lost. So I asked my mother, I said, I would like I need a guide, a spiritual guide to show me the way, because it seems we can lose ourselves, So in that sense, when I was 17, 19 years old, my mother told me that when the disciple is ready, the master arrives.
During an LSD session, an LSD trip, there was a young friend I had who had a really bad experience out of it. So I had to forget a little about my own trip and take care of him for, I think, 20 hours or something. It was a long time where I just had to make sure he was okay, because he was losing his mind in a way, and he was scared that he was going crazy and all that. So, and I didn't think much about it. It was okay because I was in an okay state and I had okay time, so it wasn't really a problem for me. But then a few days later, after, then he came and gave me, he didn't know anything about spirituality, but he had bought a book to thank me for this experience. He had given me Bhagavad Gita.
I remember standing in the library at the Stellenbosch Municipal Library. Sometimes a book jumps off the shelf and grabs you by the throat and grabs you. And I suddenly had this book about yoga in my hands. I'd never known about yoga, and it was I looked at these things and I had to take this book out and buy myself some gear and started doing postures and breathing in my res room,
One thing that happened in Calgary before I left there is I had gone to a Hatha yoga class. It was an Indian man who was teaching it. And, this was 1971. There were not a lot of yoga studios the way they are now, At that time, this was quite unusual. And when we'd finished the exercises, we lay down in the corpse pose. And then he would come around behind us and he would just stroke our forehead, just very lightly. And when he did that, to me, I had an experience, I don't know how to exactly explain it, but it was as if something opened up. It opened up in my mind, and he also felt it. And my first thought was to go to India and find a teacher who would teach me how to teach Hatha Yoga. because then I could go back to Canada and just teach Hatha Yoga and live a very peaceful life. You know, it was all about peace, peace and love. And so I had this idea that this is what I wanted to do. It's not how it quite worked out, but that was the intention.
I was 20 at that time, and I was on the way home from another hippie festival where I'd been 3 months living in a dugout hut in the ground, you know. And I had a Volkswagen bus, and we were a couple of guys going home, and somebody said, "Oh, there's a new ashram here, an Indian yoga ashram that starts. Shouldn't we just go and visit them?" And you know, we were a little stoned and a little smut drunk and that, and having a great time. So we went there, and that just blew my mind. Even though we came there and were not in the best condition, they were very kind to us, and there were only about 25 monks. And then there was this guru. He was a disciple of the Ramakrishna mission, and he always quoted Vivekananda. The thing is that when you're in a monastery, you are allowed, in a way, you are sanctioned to not worry about the world outside. You have this permission to just meditate and go deep and try to find out what spirituality is about, what your mind is about, what's going on inside of you, without any interference outside. So that was fantastic. So I asked if I could become a part of this, and they said that they thought that maybe I should just think a little bit about it and come back next year. Very polite. So I thought, okay, I did that. So I went back to where I lived at that time, and I totally cleaned up my act. Within a month, I stopped drinking, I stopped smoking, I stopped everything. And I got a job, truck driving, and earned the money. I paid all my debts, whatever I had, and made ready. And then next summer, I went in my Volkswagen bus, and I went up and told, now I would like to become a monk.
So, I mean, I was 18 years old when I started doing yoga, and I would just had to do it every day, like asanas and pranayama. And then visualization, which I started doing probably about a year just before I went to the army, which is, I always say, I had to do the thing that I fear the most to find the thing that I treasure the most. Because it was after my basic training that I ended up at a magazine called Paratus. Because I went to the army, and because I'd been politicized, I went to my lieutenant, and I had options. I could either become a conscientious objector, in which case I would have to serve 5 years community service. I would be put on trial, and of course convicted, and be sentenced to 5 years community service, which some of my friends did. Some of my friends immigrated, they fled out of the country to avoid the draft. And I just thought, I'm going to play it from the inside. So I went to my lieutenant and said, look, I'm not a conscientious objector. It's probably lying a little bit. But I'm not carrying a gun. I just thought, you know what? If I don't carry a gun, I won't compromise myself. I will never put myself in a position where I'm going to compromise my principles. So I'm going to stay here. I'm going to angle to get the magazine job, but I'm not carrying a gun. I'm not going to shoot anybody ever. And then I managed to get into Paratus, and I had the time of my life.
And you didn't have any possessions, and only the clothes you needed, small heaps, you know, no cupboards and anything like that. The bed was just a cot on the floor. Not a cot, it was a mattress on the floor, you know, and that. And you had a small pouch for your toiletry, you know, for soap and that. It was very, very simple and very lovely living in a way. I must admit, many times when I had big troubles out in real life, I just wish I could go back there, because it was actually a really great time. Well, the strange thing, after the 4 years, there was a kind of urge, you could say. That's the only way I can explain it, because there was no real outer reason I could imagine that wanted me to leave the place as such, but it was a kind of urgency that just came more and more, that I had to go out and try out what I had learned here, and maybe I had to follow some other path. I don't know. It was not like very formulated. It wasn't very. It was just a feeling. It was in the heart kind of thing. It's a kind of urge.
So with my mother, my father, every day we have been meditating 20 minutes, just to get an answer from God.
And I decided to go to India to find a teacher.
Could it be, I'll never stand up taller? Could it be that nothing's gonna change when the muscles round my brain start to make me feel insane? I think it's time to get on the road again.
When I got to London, I met a fellow from the US, and he was also interested in a spiritual path, but he also was going to India, and he was also looking for a teacher. So we talked a bit, and we went to hear a few swamis in London and so on, but he was going a different route to India than I was. I traveled down in more the southern part of Europe and through Yugoslavia and to Greece, where I sold my car, and then took trains and buses and any kind of transport I could find across Turkey and Iran and Afghanistan and Pakistan into India. But this fellow went to Denmark, where there were a few people practicing heartfulness, and they were friends of his, and so he started the practice there.
We went to Banarasi, and we met Mananda Moy, and we had such a good contact. And she said, we are all one, like that, with the heart. She was a saint, and a great saint.
So when I arrived in Delhi, I was walking down the street one day and I saw this American fellow again. Now, I'd been traveling with a group of friends and we were having kind of a good time, so I was not as focused on my drive to find a teacher as I could have been. But he told me a little bit about it. I said, well, that's very interesting, but it was meditation. And I thought, well, my aim here was to learn Hatha Yoga as well, so I just kind of left it.
Then afterwards, we met the Dalai Lama, Sarnath,
And I was still traveling a little bit with this group of people that we'd met on the road together. There was safety in numbers, so we had 5 or 6 of us. So we went to Kathmandu, and I had Christmas and New Year's there, and then I realized, look, you're not you're not here to have a good time, whatever that was, but you have to resume your search, so just get serious here. So they were traveling onwards to various places, and I stayed back for a couple of days in Kathmandu.
Then we went to Allahabad, to the Kumbh Mela. That's the big one, every 12 years, full of gurus, of kind of gurus, and one was 260 years old, and we have got experiences with him, it was funny,
And then something very strange happened. I was walking down the street. I met this fellow again, this American fellow again. So this is the third time. And he finally convinced me that I should, this was fate. We kept meeting like this, coincidentally, and so I should be starting this meditation. So I just said, okay. And right away, I rode away to the teacher, to Babaji Ramchandra, and I asked him if I could come and visit. And he sent me back a postcard right away and said, "You're very welcome. Please come on the 24th of January." So I traveled around a little bit. I think I went to see the Taj Mahal while I was waiting for the 24th of January, and ended up right on that day in Shahjahanpur, where he lived.
Then we came back and we went to Lucknow. And by chance, I can imagine, by chance, Babuji was there on the railway station. And at that time, the train could stay half an hour, 45 minutes, in the station. So we went into the compartment, and Babuji was there.
He was 72 years old, same age I am now, and he was a very thin man, beautiful beard, beautiful eyes that you just get lost in, and he just exuded this atmosphere where you just felt cherished and accepted, and it was just a natural flow of being with him. He would give sittings, and meditation sittings, but not on a regular basis. He'd say, "Well, let's just sit for meditation," and often we'd just sit in front of him, and just be in this little space.
And Babuji said, "Do you want a sitting? We'll have a sitting." And at that moment, I really understood what is a master, a spiritual master. Because, in fact, he gave me everything I wanted, And after that, I did not want anything. So he could give everything, and it was pure love.
And he gave me, after that, one face-to-face sitting, and then he signed my preceptor certificate to go out and train others. And that was dated the 3rd of February, 1972. And the only instructions that I got to do the work was just that: you go do the work. That was it. And I'm eternally grateful, actually, because this is work that is done through the heart. And if your mind gets involved, then you're not allowing this stream of pure love, of transmission going through you. because your mind's a little busy with, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? What should I say? What should I do? So it was the best training I could ever get.
It was really at Paratus in our offices in Pretoria, where I would be sitting in my old typewriter, manual typewriter, typing my articles. And there was a conversation going on in the background between Paul John, who's now in Australia, and an Afrikaans Buddhist called Marius. And they would speak about meditation. And our meditation never registered on my radar. So while I was writing these stories, I would like tune into this conversation, like I was intrigued.
I started a small truck business actually, and at one point one of my trucks was driving a lot for antique business that did high-end kind of antiques on auctions. And one of the auctioneers had a system, and she asked if I could do a removal for her they were moving from their house to their summer house. Very early, I think it was in February or March or something, quite early for Denmark, but they were doing that. And so I said, yeah, I can do that. So I did that, and when we came to this house, the children and the husband, they ran down to the beach, so the wife was alone and I was there. So and she was a little upset, why are they running off? Anyway, so I said, well, let's just bring the stuff in. So we started taking it in, and there was a box with books, and on the top of it is a wooden box, quite heavy. On the top of it, there was a book. I just looked at it, it said Truth Eternal. I thought, gosh, that's quite a title. It had a great front page of that. And then also, I was thinking, Truth Eternal, it was like a statement. It's not like, normally in Danish you would say, the eternal truth. Even in English you probably do. But Truth Eternal, that was like a statement, like you couldn't get around it. It's like, this is it, you know. Truth Eternal, and there's no more to it. So I asked this lady what this was. Oh, she said this is Sahaj Mark, and she said, how do you do this meditation? So, but you get sittings from a preceptor. So where do I find one? I'm one, she said. She was one of the old preceptors from Babaji's time. So I got my first sitting there in the middle of all the removal, and I went back to Copenhagen. Next day I came and got my second and my third, and the third day, and that's how I got into Sahaj Mark.
So one day I went to Paul and said, what is this meditation that you're talking about? He says, yeah, Paul is very enthusiastic. Yeah, it's like you must come and take sittings. And I was intrigued, so I went, and that was it.
But the moment I got that first thing, I just had like a complete explosion of, there was bliss and light and everything was there. It was just like, there was no doubt this is fantastic. So like I'm back home again. But I suddenly understood, gosh, you can get into this state without drugs. You can do it with just what you have inside it. The whole thing is inside you. You don't need an outer agent to do it. And that interested me. Then I started getting into it.
To me, it's always, from the start, it's been more important than food. In the morning, before I have breakfast, I need to meditate.
And so I changed, I think I was more in Jnana Yoga before, yoga of knowledge. Then I shift in the, not bhakti, but love, And I say, this I want. So I recognize something I did not know. Don't you understand? And say, yes, this I want.
There was always this very strong connection there, and it was my life. It just became my life. So it wasn't like I had to take out an hour from my life to do meditation. It was almost as if my life became a meditation and a connection and a unity that I felt.
Once you experience, and I think that is the key word, it's been about the experience. You don't have to believe anybody. It's actually quite a scientific path, because you go inside, and if you read Babaji's books, he was really a scientist. He went inside himself and he went on a journey and he described the journey.
We have all come from one big kind of entity, which is the universe in itself, with everything in it. It's the force, the power of creation, everything that is in creation. We come from that same source. We are like a little drop of that, or a speck of that source. And we have all these things in us, like we talked earlier, people talk about microcosmos and macrocosmos. So we are like, we have so many cells and so many things going on, so many processes that are so fantastic, that we in itself are a universe. But we are also a part of a bigger universe, which is all the planets and the nature as it is, all the 7-point-something billion people. We are all the same, we have the same kind of source, the same energy, the same. If you stripped everything else of us, we would have the same energy in there. And the really idea, I think, with the creation of life is really to fulfill, to make this thing come out of the creation and become all-pervading. That's how I see it. So my little clustered life force caught in this body has to somehow come out, in a way, realize itself in all my cells, in all my being, and take over totally, so my body in a way can be cast away and has nothing to do with it anymore, and then enter into this all-pervading everything. This is my own words, and this is how I understand it. I don't know if it makes sense.
There's different paths for different people at different times of their lives. It's very clear to me. And I have a very, very good friend. We met when we were 14 years old, riding our horses, and we have been buddies ever since. And she does, in fact, at the time I was meeting Babaji in 1972 in India, she was meeting her teacher, who was Kirpal Singh, in Vancouver. He'd been there for a seminar. Hundreds of people went. And that's when she became devoted to him. And she still is devoted to that path. We are wonderful friends. We have such a bond. And that's, the bond is that other people are also looking for that genuine thing inside of them. They're also on a search. And we all have different ways of getting there.
So, Robert, after all these years of meditating, do you know what the goal of human life is? What is the goal?
There's this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, $1 million, I think.
I've been walking for days and days, listening to you. You keep on humming the same old tune. All of the things that you've been through match the scars on your face like tattoos. In a couple of days we could be gone, leave with nothing and start traveling home. No time to rest, been here before, in the undergrowth, divided by the single mode. as my heart, and I've been waiting.